We've waited long enough and we have a great turnaround. So let's say thank you for all of you who joined to this new meetup regarding OWASP security for low code, no code. Hi, nice to meet everyone. I'm Ziv. I'm the leader of the community. With me today, I have David Wyatt. We're gonna have a great time today showing you folks some critical vulnerabilities within the Microsoft ecosystem, specifically Fabric and Power Platform. We're going to walk you through a guided tour onto how you can exploit those and how you can manifest those in your environment, and of course, help you folks to be instructive and understanding how to fix those. So I will start by saying that the community is being around for the past 2 years. We're around 250 folks. If please feel welcome to join. You have all the info in this main deck. And I will say that everything that you are viewing today, materials, including videos and slides, everything will be available. It's completely open source. And I invite anybody who is an enthusiast of this market, as the intersection between business application development, whether it's low code, enterprise AI, and security, of course. Feel free to reach out and we can build these types of sessions together. I will say that we have content for many upcoming meetups with disclosures that we're making with Microsoft and with other platforms. So stay tuned. David, can you hear me well?
Yep, can hear you clearly. Now I'll mute myself.
Correct. So for this agenda today, we have segregated the session into 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about how unauthorized users can get access to data within the Fabric ecosystem using a small LLM object they introduced. Really cool. And the second and third part are going to be covered by David, and he's going to show you how easy it is to get hacked within the Power Platform suite. Very cool stuff. So about me, I'm Ziv. I'm the director of product at Zenity, a company that is focused on business, securing business apps and business users, whether it's low code, no code, or enterprise AI. I'm the leader of the community for 2 years now, give or take. I have 3 little girls, been in this space for the past 14, 15 years. A big fan of low code. So if you are an enthusiast as well, please join us. We can make this bigger together. So I first encountered this data leakage within Fabric, or what we used to call PowerBI, a few months ago. Of course, because this is a vulnerability, we had to go through the classic responsible disclosure, showing this to Microsoft ahead of time to make sure that they can address it. Unfortunately, this one, I think it isn't yet fixed, and they're okay with it. So everything that you're seeing here, you can know for sure that we did everything in our power to make sure that it's fixed, and you can replicate the same behavior in your tenant. So what's the gist here? The idea here is that Fabric has 2 core objects, I would say, or Power BI has 2 core objects. One is the semantic models, what they used to call data set, that's the actual data, and the reports, the visual layer on top of that semantic model. Now, the role-based access control lives both on the report and on the semantic model side. Now, and if you want to limit access to the data set because the semantic model has more information than is included within the report, you can limit that data access. And users are not supposed or will not be able to get access to the data that is not shared through the report. Now, that's true, excluding a small component, LLM component called Q&A, that you can embed as a maker within the report. Once that object is embedded within the report and you share the report, somebody else can ask a question using the Q&A component and basically bypass the existing role-based access controls that sits on the report and go directly to the semantic model to get the data. Let me show you a step-by-step tutorial of how this happens. I'll show you a few slides, and then we'll also show you a demo that I've recorded seeing this live. So the first thing you should do is, of course, create a semantic model. You can do this with a basic table. You can see in this example, we have a few columns, very, very basic. Now, all you have to do is basically create a report using that same semantic model. And as you can see, this report exclude a specific column called deal size. It's not here in the report. It exists only in the semantic model. Now, the third part is, of course, adding this Q&A that appears everywhere in a report within Fabric. All you have to do is click, add it, and it will help you and your users who have access to the report to ask simple questions about the data, because sometimes reports could be really, really long, especially if it's a table. You don't want to browse through everything. You want to have a simple way to get into data insights. So all you have to do is ask a question. For example, who is our newest customer? And the Q&A will just work. It's perfect. Now, once everything is set, the report is ready. You can share it with your peers, with your colleagues, with your friends, and you can do it directly. You can do it through a link. And as you can see, I've aligned myself to list privilege, and I remain on a read level. So no privilege access here. So now user B, let's call it, that is getting this access to this report is getting this report. He can open it. He can see, of course, the data, and he can explore or try to explore the semantic model, meaning the data layer behind the report. Once he's trying to do so, you can see that he has like a prompt saying the data set is read-only, in this case, semantic model. You cannot really access it. So this is great. Being we see a Fabric security control that prevents me as an unauthorized user to view the data. This is critical, right? Now, there is a glimpse of something really interesting here, because I'm not able to see the actual data, but under the table section on the right side, I can see the metadata, or the model at least, of the table. So at least I have a hunch of what's inside here. And I can see that there is a deal size column that is hidden from the report. Now, me as an attacker, I can use that to exploit the Q&A object, and we will see that in a second. So basically, I go back to the report, and now I can ask more elegant questions like, who is our biggest customer? And biggest customer means who is the customer with the highest deal size? Now, you can focus on the lower part and see that it actually got me the information, and it also referenced the deal size column. Now, remember, this is data that I'm not supposed to have access to. And when I tried to access this data directly, I failed. But somehow the Q&A object enabled me to view this data in its entirety. And the reason it allows me to get a hold of this data is because the Q&A just goes directly to the dataset, or semantic model, as they now call it. Let me pause for a second to see if we have any questions. And again, feel free to ask questions. Oh, there is a perfect question from David. I see. Why do you have deal size inside your model if you don't know? That's a very valid question. So many times we see from our experience that people are building semantic models or data sets, and they are used for various reports, right? So you not necessarily want to use everything in the semantic model, okay, in a single report, but you want to segregate the data model into different reports, and each report can represent different elements. And that's why this is the way it is. And you are correct in your assumption, meaning our guidance to our respective clients is to try and keep the semantic model exactly to what the report needs, meaning a 1-to-1 ratio. But that's hard, especially if you take a look at all the legacy, meaning existing data sets and reports that were built on top of them. So if you go to enterprise customers, you'll see that you have hundreds of thousands of those that are already created. So trying to make a mess, trying to make some order within that type of tenant is really, really hard. Let me see if we have more questions. So to summarize what I've just shown, it's a very clear path to going from an unauthenticated user who can only view a portion of a report, but through the Q&A object is able to gain access to the entirety of the data within the semantic model. And some of it, of course, can be sensitive. So what if I wanted to restrict the sensitive data and exclude it from the report? Now the end user or the user I share the information with has also information, also access to the, can also have gain access to the sensitive data. Now let me show you a full-fledged demo of how this looks like. Just a second. So for the purpose of this demo, I created a semantic model with some basic info. It's a table called customer list, has several columns: customer name, customer deal size, start and end date. As you can see, highly sensitive. Now let's see the lineage and the report that was created through this dataset or semantic model. As you can see, I created a customer list report. Let's open it up. And as you can see, it's basically almost the entirety of the semantic model, excluding the deal size, which is too sensitive to share. So I excluded it from the actual report that I want to share with my colleagues. Let's see how this looks like. If I choose the right element table, you can see that the semantic model doesn't have, or the report doesn't have, the deal size anymore. Now, as you can see, this is a long list. So I added the Fabric's Q&A engine to help me get insights or quick insights for this data. Q&A is a natural language process engine that can be extended to Copilot for Power BI as well. So now what we want to do is basically share this report with our colleagues. To do that, all we have to do is click on Manage Permissions. And as you can see, I've already created a link to share with the rest of my org. And by default, this link is available to anybody in your organization. Of course, list privileged, I provided just the read access. This means that anybody who opens the report should have access only to the report, but not to the underlying data from the semantic model. So let's grab this link. And next, we're going to open it with a different user in the same org. So as you can see, the report is available, and I'm logged in as a different user. So as we can see, the report is fully functional and working. Now, the user can use the Q&A to get insights for the data that is currently visible, like who is our current newest customer. But he can also do something else and try and see the semantic model. Now remember, this is restricted. Now the user can actually see the tables. So you can see the customer list, the name, the contact, start and end date, and the deal size. Now granted, because it's restricted, the user cannot explore in depth and actually see the data, but this gives him an opening. Now he can go back to the report and try and ask other types of questions to get more information about data he shouldn't have access to. For example, who is our biggest customer? Now this info is not at all in this report, but nonetheless, the QA engine just returned the correct answer. So how is this possible? The end user doesn't have access to this data. That's true enough. However, Fabric bypasses that restriction and provides answers from the full semantic model. So let's summarize what we've just seen. User A built a report using a portion of the semantic model as some of the data was too sensitive to share. He then shared the report via a link that is accessible by the entire tenant by default. He then added a simple Q&A object to help get report insights quickly. Now, user B was able to zone in on the portion of the data that was restricted, and through Fabric was able to get the sensitive data. And we're back. So that's basically the walkthrough, and you can definitely try this at your own tenant, and you'll see that it's still like that. I think the best practice here is, of course, to try and avoid having multiple reports on a singular data set if you don't want to have the entirety of the data set exposed. That's pretty much it. Next in line, we have David. David, you want to take controls?
Yeah, I'll have a go. Hopefully, it will let me take it. Share. Hopefully, everybody can see that.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So, a little bit about me. I'm a senior staff engineer at TGX, and I'm generally around platform and administration of the Power Platform, and that's my area of expertise. I do a bit of Power Platform blogging on the side. Hopefully you've read a couple of my articles. I'm also recently been really lucky enough to be nominated as a Microsoft MVP for Power Automate and Power Apps. And I got a little bit of a side hustle making Chrome extensions, generally trying to help me be a better developer. But it's kind of a little bit of a hobby, also helps my productivity. So let's dive in. So hopefully everybody knows about the Power Platform, and there's lots of key components that people talk about. But the real power in the Power Platform for me, especially in the context of today's meeting, is the connectors. The connectors give the Power Platform its real power. They allow it to expand beyond the confinements of the platform. You can think of them as kind of pipes or roads, how you want to, that allow the platform then to interact with other systems like SharePoint or Outlook. And the key to that is the connections. So connections allow the connectors to interact with them. What people don't realize is that those connections are almost as good as a password in some respects. It's kind of labeled as a connection because it sounds a little bit less intimidating for the kind of low-code developers. But at the core of it, it is an access to your data. So it's really important to keep that in mind. Now, the standard approach for like applications on things like Azure and other processes is what we call granular access. So if my app needed to use Outlook, I would set it can have certain permission, like it can read emails and send emails. That stops the application doing things like delete emails or anything else like that. Now, the Power Platform takes a bit more of a relaxed approach, or as I call it, the master key approach. And that means if the app has access to Outlook, it has access to all of Outlook. So that app can read emails, send emails, delete emails. And it can even do more than that, because your Outlook would also give access to your calendar and your contacts and likewise. So you end up giving quite a lot of access and permissions with just one simple click. So let's kind of dive into it from the Power Apps side and what we can do with these connections. Power Apps leverage what we kind of call an on behalf of approach. And that means that when you log into an app, you will sign in with your connections and give that key to the app. What also happens is the app can also pass that key onto a flow called by the app. And this can be anything from SharePoint to Outlook. What it means is that if in an app you write to SharePoint, SharePoint will see it as you writing to it. And likewise, if an app sends an email, it will see it as you sending an email because you're leveraging your connections at that point. Now, the Power Platform has been working on kind of exploring that and sharing that with you. So when you log in as a Power App now, and you're using something like Outlook in this example, you can see that it's starting to show granularity of what you're doing. So the app here on the left, it's going to send emails and get emails. So even though in theory it has the power to do anything in Outlook, you know what it's using with those permissions. Unfortunately, it's not quite the same with any flow called by an app. In that case, all you get is a very generic sign that says it's going to use Outlook. Now, PowerUps was the same until recently, and Microsoft are working on adding that functionality. But at the same time, you have to think about the limitations of the platform. So things like HTTP connectors in Outlook will be very difficult to see what it's doing with it. And on top of that, just because you're giving it a permission to send an email and there's a valid reason for it, doesn't mean that there might be misusing that for other reasons that you can't see. So letting people know about it isn't necessarily solving the problem. So we're going to do a little scenario here to kind of demonstrate what could potentially happen. And this is a simple email from a member staff to their boss to say, hey, I've created this really cool app. It brings everybody's Outlook calendars together. Can you give it a test for me? Quite, nothing too shocking there. The manager will log in. It flags that it needs access to the Outlook. And again, that makes sense. It's a calendar app. It's going to link everybody's calendar. He feels comfortable in clicking and approving that access. And then he gets a generic error. The app needs an update, something wrong with the platform, whatever it is, just a non-generic error. At that point, he's going to reply back and say, hey, I tried to get in, got an error, it's not working. Obviously, I'm testing it for you. There's problems. And they'll get a generic email back saying, yeah, no problem, the app's broken. Give me some time, I'm going to fix it. And that whole interaction will probably take less than 5 minutes. And if that manager is particularly busy, which most of them are, I can't imagine it sticking in their memory. But what they don't realize is that behind the scenes, something's happened. And let's just give a little demo video here. So as you can see on the left here, this is the staff, and they're going to request approval for an expensive expense. And this is the manager's email box on the left-hand side, on the right side. So they send the email, and you give it a few seconds, and it lands in the manager's mailbox. Now, without any interaction, something's going to happen. The mail has disappeared, and member staff has just had his expense approved. So with no interaction, without any knowledge, the manager now has approved something that the member staff wanted to. So what exactly just happened? Well, when the boss signed into the app, they also signed into a flow and passed on those credentials to his Outlook connection. That flow then continued to run even after the boss had left the Power App and was constantly checking the Outlook for a specific email that it wanted to find. And as soon as that email arrived, it would kick into action, it would reply with approved and delete the email. And what's really interesting about this attack as well is there's a big disconnect. So if, let's say, the app login was on a Friday, the following Wednesday, the email was approved, and a couple of weeks later, the expense was spotted, it's very hard to link the dots between the email on a Wednesday and a 5-minute app login on a Friday. So you really kind of disconnect it and make it really hard to track what is actually happening. And the flow itself, this is it really. It's not particularly complicated. It's about 7 or 8 actions. And what it does is we first of all declare a variable, and this is just a flag that you can actually still, just a flag that we can stop it. If we want to, we can continue this. And then we drop into a continual loop. And all the loop does is goes and grabs certain emails with certain conditions. This time it's from a certain email address. It loops over those emails and actions the approval, then deletes the email. And finally, we stop the flow if we want to disconnect it. If it didn't find the email we're looking for, it would delay 5 seconds and try again. Now, at the moment, I'm not sure if it's changed, but at one point, flows could run for 30 days, but there was talk about extending them indefinitely. So in theory, this flow could continue for as long as you wanted it to do. And the person who logged into the app has no way of knowing about this or actually ever stopping it. It's totally disconnected from them. And what was it in the flow? And in the app? Well, it was just one line of code, test.run. That's all it needed in this application. So you can see a simple flow with 7 actions and 1 line of code in an app. And you can integrate this. And you can also see here, like, you can leverage, I've hashed this out, but you can leverage the connections directly in the app as well. So if you don't want to do anything with the app and with the flow, you can do stuff in the apps as well. So the Power Apps have that same permission. The difference is that it will be at the point of logging into the app. So that disconnect is hard to do if you did it that way, whereas the flow has a total disconnection. I'll stop now in case any questions before I dive into the Power Automate one.
Let me check David real quick.
Thank you.
Any open questions? There is a question from David. Is this an insider attack?
Yes, it's very much insider attack. But the thing to be wary of now is that insider attacks are a lot more easier. There's examples of people get employed remotely to get access to these systems. It's very much so that area you need to be thinking about. And then there's also the internal threat from disgruntled employees or anything like that, or people under kind of duress from external. So yes, it is an internal attack, but that's quite a wide vector. On top of that, there is now stories and examples of people getting access to companies through like recruitment, remote working, just to get access to the systems. So yeah, it is an internal attack, but it does have scope to be wider. Okay. So now I want to talk about the Power Automate one. This one's a little bit more complicated, but also a little bit more powerful. So Power Automate leverages the exact same connections. The only difference from our approach is the fact that these connections now are kind of what we call reusable. So in an environment, once you create a connection to something like Outlook or SharePoint, that connection then is available now for you to use in any of your flows. As long as you log in, then the system knows it's you and it gives you permission to use those connections. And these connections are not targeted by a flow. They are targeted to any flow within that environment. So if we keep that in mind, here's our scenario. You get an external email that says, hey, we've got this fantastic, amazing Power App, and we'd love you to test it and look at it, and then we can have a partnership. They target you, look at it. It's a simple solution. You're going to have a look at it to see what it does. There's a little video here. It's a very standard import. As you can see, we're grabbing the solution that we got from the email. We're importing it. Spin up a little bit. You'll see here we have some connections in here, like Outlook there and our Dataverse, and then it imports. And then if we open up our solution, it's a pretty standard solution that you might see across any one to import. We've got an app, we've got 8 pretty standard flows, we've got some connection references, and we've got some environment variables. There's nothing particularly unusual there. The question is, did you see what just happened? And I suspect not. You see here, it says there's 8 flows. But if we actually looked in the solution, there isn't 8 flows, there's 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This flow here is disappeared. You are very unlikely to see that in the scenario. So what just happened? Well, this is kind of what we've got, a 3-step attack. And the key thing is that solution that you got. As soon as you imported that solution, it triggered what I call the spike flow. And this flow runs on a schedule as often as possible. And as soon as it can, it creates a new flow, and then it deletes itself. And because in a solution, you can set if the flow is on and off. As soon as you import it, the flow will run straight away. The flow it creates is what I call the control flow. And this sits in the background and on a schedule looks for payload. And that payload is what it uses to create a new flow. That flow that will then run, and then it will delete the flow. And that's what the payload flow is. So in theory, that payload flow can do anything that you want to. So how is it possible for a solution with simple connections like a Dataverse connection to actually create flows? Well, that all goes to the workflows table or the processes table. So if you go to Power Apps and go to tables, see all, and search for processes, you will find the workflows table. And that is where all of your flows are now stored if it's a solution aware based flow. You can see here, we've got the flow name, we've got the status, is it on or off? And here's the crucial field, the client data. This is our flow. It's got our connection references, it's got our actions, it's got environment variables. Everything you need for flow is in that one column. And that means that with the Dataverse connection, Power Automate can create flows, it can edit flows, and it can delete flows. And it's easy to think of the Dataverse connection as something like a SharePoint. It's a way to grab your data. But because the platform's built on the same tables as the data that you put on there, that connector is incredibly powerful, and it allows you to do things like we're just saying there. So what I want to do now is kind of dive into some of the flows that we've just demonstrated. So I'm just going to put over.
David, before you continue with the demo, there is a great question here about, is there a way to spot these types of issues with your excellent code review extension?
Yes, the key thing to look into there is looking what's in the flows. So that's generally what I always recommend. If you can have a look inside the flow, open it up and have a look at what it's doing. Also look for certain connectors that are dangerous, is what I always say. There's two connectors that all shout out to me. The Dataverse connector is really important. And the other one is actually, strangely, is the Office 365 Groups connector. And that's all because of a bug in version 1 that left the Office 365 Group connector open to the entire Graph API. That meant it could do Outlook and it could also do SharePoint and it could do everything, even though it was an Office 365 Group connector. And the scary thing is that connector has been discontinued by Microsoft, thank you, but the legacy one still works. So if you've got it somewhere, you can copy and paste it and still use it. So the API is still actually active, just the connector has been hidden. So whenever you do look at other solutions, look for these kind of high risk connectors. And I always say Dataverse and Office 365 connectors, always have a look out for them because they can have the big impact. Question it. So this is our spike. This is the flow that was in the solution that we never got to see because it deleted itself. It can look basically quite, nothing particularly stands out there. We create a GUID, we've got an expression, got some loops and some Dataverse actions. So what is it actually doing that's kind of the danger? So you see here, what we're doing here is we're looping over our connection references. And the reason we're doing that is because twofold. One, we want to get our connection references, and two, we want to update our flow. So in this here, we're grabbing that connection reference and we know the name and we know the connection reference exists because it's in our solution. So I know that that's there and it's the connection reference I want. Once I've got it, I can create a new connection reference and take that connection. So let's say that was the Dataverse one. I've now created a new Dataverse connection reference and I'm taking that key to access Dataverse and put it in my own connection. And then I'm updating my definition ready to do it. And the question is, where is the definition as well? What you can do in PowerBI is be quite sneaky and hide things. So if I pop into settings, here in my secure inputs, there's my flow definition. And likewise, I do the similar thing here where I've dropped the name of the tables into these values to make it hard for you to see what's going on. And it's really easy to leverage these with a simple expression to grab them. So we can also, if you do look at the flow, it can be quite hard to see things like this. And the key question there is exactly why am I creating new connection references? Well, what I want to do is separate this totally from the solution that was imported, so that if that solution is deleted, which is probably going to be, we don't see much use of it, we separate it. If I left the same connection references, that would cause dependency issues or just break the flow. So by the fact that we've created our new connection references and a new flow, we are totally separated and it's hidden away. And then the steps are really simple. We're going to go to that workflow tables and we're going to create a new input. And we're going to drop that flow that we put in there into there. And we're going to give it a nondescript name. The next sneaky bit that we can do is we can go to the user table and find the system user. So that's right. All the default flows and actions within a Power Platform often use a system user as the owner. That's just a standard input into the table. And we can grab that. And then we can change the owner of the flow to that system owner. And the other bit I'm doing is turning it on. So again, we've totally disconnected it from the person who's imported this solution. We've now got connection references that they can't necessarily see and a flow that isn't even owned by them. So it won't appear in any of their My Flow reports or anything like that. Then the last part of the process, we're going to identify this flow here with a simple expression to grab the name of the flow from that same workflow table, and then we're going to delete it. And I just dropped a bit of logic in so I don't accidentally delete it when I'm doing my testing. But that's it. So that flow can run very quickly and it's gone. And what it does mean is that that system flow is really hard to find. The only place you can see it is if you drop into your default solution, search for cloud flows, filter by system, there it is hidden away. And you can see it's mixed in with all the ones that Microsoft have added in. The only telltale sign is this managed. All of the Microsoft ones will be managed, this one will be unmanaged. But it's very hard for you or admins to spot this now because a lot of reports that I used to do in particular was I'd filter out the system flows because I don't want them in my reports. So again, we're really hiding this really hard to make it hard to find. And what does the system flow do? Well, we run a recurrence whenever we want to run it. And then what we do is we have what I call a default flow. So this is my default flow that I want to run and create my default payload. But what I also want to be able to do is update that payload with new payloads. So I'm going to grab a certain email with a certain subject. Now, as long as I make sure that my email arrives at the time that I know, and this one's like 9:14. I can make sure that they kind of synchronize pretty nicely. And then what it would do is grab the text file from that email and update my payload and delete it. Now, the reason I have a default flow there is I might not know whose email address to email. So what it's going to do, it's going to run a default flow, email out. Now I know who owns my control, and then I can email that. So you have a default flow, but then you set yourself up to be able to update it continuously. And then it's the exact same process again as what we create a new flow with our payload. We grab our system ID, and then we turn it on and change the owner. And then after a small delay, we will delete that payload flow. And then this system flow will sit there and run a schedule every day, and it will either send off the generic flow or grab that payload. And examples of what payloads you could do, just really quick, easy ones. So this one will grab all your emails. It's a really simple one. There might be some interesting emails you want. It grabs it, creates a table, and forwards it on. This one, leveraging the fact that we know that the common data model is using Dataverse, we know that if the business is using the accounts table, that's quite a good table to look for like sensitive data like email address and telephone numbers. So we can go in there and grab the accounts table, and again, just send it to where we want it to go. We can also look at the system tables. So in this case, we're grabbing connection references, and again, grab it. But it's not just one-way movement of data. So we don't just exploit data, we can also impact the system. So if you just want to be a little bit for fun, we can grab every flow in there that you have access to, particularly if you're an admin. And then we can go in, and in this case, I'm tagging them all as DLP violations and stopping the flows. So you can get data out, but you can also go in there and impact the system, again, all through this data connection, Dataverse. So I talked about the payload email. And again, we can also make sure that this is hard to track and find. So what I do in my case is I tag it as a generic failed email. And that means that let's say the flow failed to run and delete it. If you see it, it's not suspicious. And likewise, if you see it in your delete folder, it just looks pretty normal. But if you open that email text file, there's our flow definition. So again, it's really easy to get these definitions in and hide it in kind of plain sight. So this is the interesting bit. What's the scope? So the scope of it is quite at the moment is on a schedule, it will run a flow, send an email, and then in theory, you can send a new flow and loop. But as you may have seen there, I leverage the connection reference table. So what that means, if I ask for the connection references, I can now use more connections than I started with. So my solution started off with Outlook and Dataverse. They were the two ones I needed. But if in that environment, it's got Teams or SQL or anything like that, I can grab those connection references, put them in my flow and send it in the next payload. So you're not kind of confined by what the solution started with. You can grow it out. And likewise, and more worryingly, if you have a way to identify other environments, maybe an admin connector or anything like that, you can leverage the Dataverse cross-environment connector. So that means that I can take that control flow and replicate it in any of the environments that I can see. And then again, that can grow up. So even if you did the right thing and did this in a dev environment, if you had the Power Platform admin connector for whatever reason, I can list all your environments, find what looks like production, and then create a flow in that production environment, and it can cascade out. So we start off with a solution that has access to Outlook and Dataverse in one environment, and quite quickly we can leverage all your connections and all your environments that you have access to. So in conclusion, I always like to shout this out, low code does not automatically equal safe code. It's easy to think that just because we enable anybody to use the code that it must be safe. It's not as simple as that. I also think it's really important to set up your platform with an experienced admin. It's easy to either get an existing person who does other skills like Azure, or getting somebody who's got a little bit of build on the Power Platform. They're different. You need to get somebody with expertise to understand your platform. And it's never too late to get everything right. My favorite little acronym, lifecycle management is crucial. If you lay on lifecycle management, you'll be massively protected. And that's things like dev test and prod, change controls, making sure that you have code reviews, anything that goes into production, you need to have some checks and balance on it. That's really important. And you need to analyze the platform, and that can be really tough. Tools like Fabric are hopefully going to make that easier, but you really need to look for unusual behavior in your platform and see what's happening. And you need to train your developers and users. You can't just let everybody just jump on the platform without understanding that connections are actually keys. They're actually passwords in some respect. It's easy to make the language sound user-friendly without understanding the power of it. Likewise, we should be telling our developers not to leverage too many connections, because once that connection is created in that environment, any flow could use that. So example, if let's say it's a production environment, you don't think I've got a connection, but because I logged into an app that used all those connections, my connections are in that environment. And now in theory, a flow could go and grab those connections. So apps create connections, not just flows. And the last one to call out is, if you see something, escalate it to Microsoft. They're really good at taking feedback. And if you go back to that one where we talked about the granular permissions in apps and not in Power Automate, that's from feedback that they had. And that's why I know that they're working on getting Power Automate to the same level. So it's really important, if you spot something, take the time and escalate it, because it's not necessary that anybody spotted that before. And questions. I managed to lose Zoom, so let's see if I can bring it back up.
No worries, I got you covered.
Cool.
A lot of praises. I think we covered all the questions. Great stuff, David. Thank you. And I will say, as a call out to everyone here on this session, if you're working on similar aspects of low code, no code with regards to security, it doesn't matter if it's Power Platform or other platforms like OutSystems, Fabric, Logic Apps, APN, Salesforce, whatever. We would love your input, and we would love for you to join, what we are driving here together. So I dropped my email at the group chat, so feel free to reach out specifically and talk some more and join this effort. David, I want to thank you personally. Thank you so much for jumping on this moving train and helping me push this along. And I'm sure we'll see each other again, and all of the great folks who joined us. I'm guessing we'll have another session. I think it's November or December. We'll have to see.
Thank you.
And all of the materials, folks, will be available for everybody in our community channel, and I'll of course add all of you to the community. Thanks again, and take care, everybody.